which is there's several things that are. We'll just kind of discuss some trends, and what's new for 2024. Most of the time, it's just a ploy to get you to buy something or to read something. But trends, kind of they build steam over time. There's sustainability is a big buzzword, but how that applies in the landscape is planting native plants is people are becoming more aware of the need to plant native plants, and also water gardening, water harvesting. Those are some bigger issues. How many of you enjoyed that drought we had last summer? It's brutal on a garden, especially if you planted things that are kind of on the the stretching from the upper end. A little things that like it up a little bit further north, and then you get them down here, and then the water turns off for 2 months. It really takes a toll on them. So there's all kinds of things with. I'm not going to go into the details of how to do these things, but things to research into. There's a lot more products on water harvesting. I mean, you can spend thousands and thousands of dollars if you want to catch that much water. But so there's all kinds of things from the common rain barrel and new products to make barrels easier to deal with and that sort of thing. More automatic off of the gutters and that sort of thing. But that's a trend that's becoming more popular. You'll see more products along those lines, and definitely a good idea to have a backup plan. Developments along those same lines in irrigation technology and irrigation automation. The irrigation systems we install now, our customers never, on our landscaping business side, our customers never have to touch them. They connect to Wi-Fi. They get information from weather stations and automatically adjust schedules along the way, that sort of thing. So there's all kinds of things you can do to automate that process and that sort of thing. Something I ran across was, I think they called it stump root, using old stumps to grow in. And apparently it was a thing back in the Victorian era where they would grow ferns in old, kind of showcase the ferns, and that's becoming, that's like I said, no new thing under the sun. The thing which hath been is that which shall be, and that's coming back around. So I thought that was kind of neat, something I had never heard of, but I have seen. We had I don't even know the kind of tree it was in our old house, but there was a maple that was growing about 10 feet off the ground in a crook of a tree. And I'm talking about a 2-inch maple that grew for several years. It eventually died because it wasn't totally sustainable. It couldn't develop a real root system because the tree it grew in was still alive. But things along those lines. Sometimes stumps, are just viewed as something you got to pay, $200 to get somebody to come grind it out. And there may be something else to do with that besides just grinding it out of the ground. Just a note from my experience, if you do get stumps ground out, depending on what you're doing in that area, get them either plan on or get the stump grinder to remove the chippings, because there's so much material there, and it takes about 4 years for that stuff to break down. Especially if you're planning on putting earth, turn it into a lawn area, and get those clippings removed out and get them to grind down deep under the soil. Turf needs a good 9 to 12 inches of space to develop just a halfway decent root system. And a lot of stump grinders, they'll grind it 2 inches below the surface, throw the stumps on top of it, call it good. And then you come out there and can't do anything with that area. You can't plant on it. It just doesn't have any depth of earth to grow anything. So, side note for some practical knowledge. Anybody dealt with that kind of issue with the stump, getting the stump ground out, and then you come out, you plan on using something to find out you're not going to use it? That's pretty common and discouraging. So, I just drew a total blank. Let me get to this presentation, giving you some mistakes. It'll trigger something as I go along. So some common landscape mistakes and how to avoid them. Let's see if, well, Might have to use this. All right. How many of you seen anything that looks like this? Hopefully not. I would assume they're going to move that house, and that's why it's dug out like that. Looks like maybe they're changing the area into a shopping center or something. But this is an exaggeration. When you're building a house, or if you're doing any kind of major project, yeah, we're getting ready to start somebody wants a playground in the backyard for their kids, and they're going to cut it out and put in a retaining wall and that sort of thing. First thing we're going to do is scrape all the topsoil off. A lot of contractors, that topsoil is any kind of decent, they'll scrape it off and they'll go sell it for $250, $300, $600 a load, depending on what they can get out of it. And then you have to buy topsoil when your project's done to come back in and cover over. And so be aware of that. That's a pretty common situation. And you see that when developers come in, they're starting a new subdivision down in Dayton, and excavator guys are rarely landscapers. Most of the time, they're heavy equipment operators, and they don't have any idea about soil biology. They don't have any idea about soil quality and those sort of things. And so keep that in mind, and don't allow your topsoil to get taken away. All right, we're all working now. So the following comments actually go with this next picture here. So a lot of times you have this beautiful house, 3/4 acre one, and where do they land? All around the house, right? And then what do you do to landscape the yard? You plant a maple and an oak, right? And there's so much more potential in that. And when someone's observing a landscape like that, they drive by, and the perception of where the property is, basically any definition ends where the landscaping ends. So producing beds that kind of create borders. And you don't want to be like, this is my property, plant that one tree right on the corner. But incorporating the whole property and realizing what you can do. In this example here, there's obviously some grade change. I don't think my pointer will show up on the screen there. But there's some grade change in here. You could do so many different things. Do a water feature. You could do a big old bed in the middle that kind of draws the attention from the street to the house. And when you just have open lawn, what would be the reason to have just open lawn and no landscaping? Ease of maintenance. All right. But when you're talking about landscape design, it's focused on ease of maintenance. It's focused on having something pretty. And so that's something to consider. This ties in with another problem we're going to discuss, which is bad bed scale. This is probably relatively new construction. All plants start out small. The Master Gardener mantra, right plant in the right place, is very, very important. But a lot of times a bed, I don't want to point any fingers, but I noticed a project at a commercial site, I'll put it that way, where someone is planting some emerald green arborvitaes where there's a large wall beside this commercial property, and they're planting the arborvitaes 6 to 12 inches away from the wall. Well, we've got some that we planted at our church years ago, 7 years, I don't remember how long ago, but they're about 12 feet tall and they're this wide. And so what's going to happen is those arborvitaes still want to get that big. You're going to be all against that wall. Somewhere down the road, that wall is going to need some kind of maintenance, whether it's painted or cracks repaired or something like that. And what's going to happen? Whoever the contractor is going to come in and whack those trees. And so keeping those kind of things in mind, but with residential application, really any kind of landscaping, there's one thing that determines how big your beds should be. It's not the size of the lot, and it's not necessarily the square footage of the house. What should determine, anybody know what should determine how big out from the house your beds should be?
The height.
Close.
Width. trees and stuff.
I'd be worried about roots and foundations.
Those are factors, but there's one thing in particular.
Worried about the rain through the rain house. So I got a problem with that. Okay, try that near the house.
All of those are factors, but the biggest thing is overlooked the majority of the time. It's the roof line. How tall your roof is determine how far out your beds are. So if you've got everything's a 1-story ranch and your gutter line is 8 foot off the ground, 9 foot off the ground, then an 8-foot bed is going to be sufficient room. If you've got a house like this where that roof reaches way up, or you've got a wall that's 2 stories and that sort of thing, and you've got a 4-foot bed, which is very common, unless there's a reason to only have a 4-foot bed. There's a walkway coming beside it, or there's a patio, something like that. That a lot of times, this is one of the number one mistakes I see is that there's just not enough room. And the main reason that people do this is just oversight, just not knowing. The other thing is, the bigger you make that bed, the more expensive that bed is, right? Because you got your got more cover material, whether it's mulch or rock or whatever you're using. So it exponentially increases the expense. But sometimes you've got these $1 million houses with $100,000 house landscapes, and so there's a mixed match, and it doesn't, the landscape doesn't complement the architecture of the structure. And that's something to keep in mind. So this entire planting should come out more from the house in this example. Often we focus on the shape of the beds. Beds come out to be like this, so on and so forth. And we forget that what most people are going to perceive as the shape is the lawn area coming up to that bed. And so keeping that in mind. Larger beds, one, that they're more aesthetically pleasing from the outside looking in, but they also give the opportunity, if you've got a house that the foundation is up off the ground, you got a decent crawl space, then your windows are, that much higher. If your window's this high, you're never going to see a 4-foot shrub that's planted right up against the house from inside. You stretch that bed out, you use larger plantings, kind of, transition down through several heights, then you can see some of the landscape even from inside. Number 2, any questions or comments along number 1? All right. Fear of subdividing is number 2. You could say that was the problem with that first one also. There's just big wide lawn, but a lot of times you can break up the landscape space into different use areas, the herb garden, the perennial garden, those kind of things. Now, one thing that I am seeing and I think is really cool, me personally, is incorporating, and it's kind of a trend. I told you something would trigger they call it, somebody put a fancy name to it, but basically incorporating edibles in your landscape. I've got a customer that he plants tomatoes right in the middle of all his other landscape every year. Just pops a couple of tomatoes here and there, and he'll have them repeating. So it looks like it's part of the design. And, you think about it, he's already got his watering system there. The beds are already mulched, so on and so forth. And so, he'll have, a couple of squash plants or zucchini or something like that, just here or there. And they're just there for the growing season, and then he pulls them up. He's got asparagus in one little area. It just kind of, it works in his landscape. So that's kind of a neat idea, but incorporating edibles. But you may have a section you subdivide out, and you have your vegetable garden as part of your landscape instead of this, rectangular area out in the middle of the backyard. That's just an idea to throw out there. The water garden, another one. In this example, you can see that little grade change. I would assume this is a backyard. That's what it looks like. And it looks like they cut in and placed those rocks and then planted evergreens on top of it. And it just creates this, that would have been a lot easier to mow if it was all grass, if they didn't do that. Now they got to use, they might have to use a push mower, depending on where the house is in relation to this that area. But it makes you want to just walk along that pathway. It looks like maybe there's some lavender brush seeds, right there behind the evergreens. Makes you want to walk back there and see what's next. And with landscape design being intentional with what you're doing, are you creating that sense of, hey, you're leading people through the landscape. Have visitors over. There's just this creates a natural desire to want to walk back there. Where if it was just all grass, you'd be content just sitting on the porch, right? So, I'm not a fan of reading whatever's on the slide. So, I'm not going too fast through these things. So you can read the missing edge. This is a huge pet peeve of mine. When I first moved up here in the county, it seemed like no one used it. That has changed over the past 20 years. But I've been to properties where the grass has grown this far over the edge of the driveway. And where there's sidewalks. You can walk through Spring City and there's places where the sidewalks, you don't even realize they're there because the grass has been grown over for so long that, kids have grown up not knowing there were sidewalks there. So the problem with that is not keeping up with the edges. And those edges produce that sense of intentionality, that this is where this is, this is where this is. Anywhere two surfaces meet together is an edge. The way those are maintained depends on the type of edge it is. Around this tree, that tree box edged with an edger. Now, a lot of people wouldn't think about that, but that's what produces that clean edge. If you let that go for even 2 weeks, I don't care what kind of grass it is, even fescue is going to grow over that edge, and that border around the pea gravel will disappear in no time. Now, if it's Bermuda, it'll be covered over in a season. Yes, ma'am.
You need to put your edge into the ground to keep the grass from, crabgrass. Well, I call it crabgrass. I'm from New Orleans. It would grow underneath stuff when it runs. How deep does that have to be to prevent that?
It depends on the type of grass. So the cool season grasses are bunch type grasses, and there you just run an edger on the surface. And it's done. With Bermuda,
it is that what crabgrass is?
Well, crabgrass, technically, what crabgrass itself, it does spread multiple ways, but wintertime completely dies out, goes back from seed. But Bermuda just goes dormant, and a lot of people call Bermuda grass crabgrass because of the way it grows, and it's very aggressive. It grows fastest, and it'll go. I've seen it 6 to 9 inches down. The only way I have to effectively keep it out of beds, if that's your lawn grass, is we will dig down a foot. We'll put in a mowing strip. We do it out of natural stone, but we dig down 6 to 8 inches and then compact that subsoil, put in a mud barrier fabric, and then a gravel base, and then lay it in a mortar. Come through. That's the only thing I've found. But it's producing a barrier basically a foot wide, about 8 inches deep. So that grass would really have to go down. Now it'll grow across that if you don't plant it. It'll grow across it in 3 weeks, 4 weeks during the growing season. Just really aggressive. So my remedy for Bermuda is pilot.
Is that the fabric?
No, it's a chemical that you go through. You get about 90% killed in one season.
Do I get it at the egg?
Oh no, you probably don't want to buy it. It's about $100 an ounce. But it only takes a little bit. It would be something you pay an applicator to do because it's a homeowner buying it is very cost prohibitive. But it only takes like 0.33 ounces per 1,000 square feet or 0.13 ounces. You measure it with a syringe if you takes a little bit, but you do 3 applications 3 weeks apart, and then do your overseeding in the fall. And we transition yards over to fescue in 2 seasons. Bermuda's total. But that's a chemical that came out about 7 or 8 years ago. I found it to be very effective, but I hate Bermuda. I grew up in Florida, so I have a right to hate Bermuda, I think. But there's not much. Even if you use one of those manual edgers that has that deep blade, and you use your foot, all you're doing is cutting that edge of that. It's going to start growing immediately. So there's not really an effective way to stop those roots from growing. You can spray your beds and hand pull, that sort of thing, to the aesthetic. I've seen that stuff grow under landscape fabric 5 feet the edge of the lawn, and it's just a disaster to deal with. Fescue doesn't do that. When I first went through the Master Gardener program down in Ray County, I can't remember who. I think it might have been Dr. Samples did the Turfgrass class, and he said the Master Gardener joke was, when they asked what kind of grass do you grow for a green lawn, the answer was, when do you want your lawn to be brown? If you want it in the winter, get the warm season grasses. If you want it brown in the summer, get the cool season grass. We're just in the transition zone here. This is the hardest zone to have a nice lawn in. It's expensive. It's either expensive, a lot of work, or weeds are green. So
ideas for edging that?
Sure. Like some materials, different materials for edging. There's Colmet is the standard for steel metal edging. Lowe's does carry that. It's also we get like at a landscape supply store, but that can be effective. Gives you about a 4-inch height difference. It'll hold mulch. It's just steel edging. Colmet is the standard brand that everybody carries around here. Colme. Then natural stone. We've got a lot of beautiful stone around here, and me personally, I think they're called ashlar cobbles. I can't remember the stone guy's name for them, but they're like rectangles about like this, and we use those a lot on the edge of beds, and we'll just stand them up on the thick side is facing up, so the cropped side is what you see on the top, and then you got what would usually be considered the stone face on the side. We'll dig them just a little bit down in the dirt. They stay in place decently as long as you don't have people with mowers bumping into them. But we've even had them in places where there's a little bit of water flowing across, and they stay in place, and it'll hold some mulch in place, but it's pretty. Then there are all kinds of concrete products. You got the old red scalloped edging that used to be real popular. That's still around, but Belgard makes multiple edging products. Also, a lot of times that's not thought of. People just think of like retaining walls and patios for the concrete products, but there are edging products as well, and they're made right here at Big Rock in the industrial park. So you can get on belgard.com on their website and look for edging things. You can railroad ties, landscape timbers. It kind of depends on how often you want to deal with replacing it, how permanent, and kind of the more permanent it is, the more expensive it is. But there's all kinds of different things. Anybody used anything else? Maybe a little more unique? Bricks, and bricks turned at a little bit of an angle, create that kind of look. The biggest thing is do the work to install it right from the get-go. Don't just throw it in there. Sometimes the easy way is a lot faster, but then in 3 months, it doesn't look good anymore. So making sure they're stable. with that brick turned on the edge, the key is to dig it down a little bit into the dirt, so you and backfill the soil and compact it well against the edges to hold it in place.
So I got a question. So my neighbor, we got a new neighbor, and they put this 3 trees with these huge rocks, which I'm not about to go out and buy a bunch of those huge rocks. I'm sure they were very expensive. So I thought, well, I'll do something water, but of course I can't have water up there, but it's on like a mound, a hill. So I had a large flat rock already up there, and then I made it like a stream out of, what size does that rock called?
About a 2-inch
Yeah,
or so.
2 to 3 inch rock, so it's kind of white gray. But I lay down the fab, then I lay down black pass, then I dumped all those rocks on top, and then I had bigger rocks, fieldstone rocks, so it looked like a little stream. Well, I've got this grass that root goes like this and up, looks like kind of like a monkey. I was like, and it's popping through the fabric and the plastic. Any ideas how to stop that? Because there I am having to do round with the Roundup. It went through the plastic and the thing. I made the effort trying to do it.
Yeah, it's
The sun, the UV rays just got my plastic, I guess.
plastic does break down, and then with any rock kind of project, I use a mud barrier fabric, which is thick.
Looks like a felt.
Yeah,
And it
that
went
sounds
right
like the
through
right
it.
stuff. So if it went through that, then it rooted from the top
Oh, so it was
and
a
rooted
seed.
through it somehow. I could have spread in and put down a root and that sort of thing. But the best solution to that is going to be non-selective herbicide. There's not really, and you can hand pull, but you'll be hand pulling forever.
Well, I can't hand pull. It's like I'm pulling out the plastic.
Yeah.
So, sorry if I'm asking too many questions, but, so you have existing beds, and so give 2 questions here. One is, how do you take that existing bed that is not good, right? It's not the right size, and, change it so you can incorporate new things. And then somebody over here said this too. I have some beds that, even though there's plenty of rain, not enough water gets to those beds. So what can you do? Maybe put lots of organic material in those beds. But what kind of plants can I plant there? So 2 different questions: how to, reshape existing beds, and then how to deal with those drought.
The key is, first of all, have in mind at least some idea of what you want it to look like when it's mature down the road. If you're going to go through the effort of redoing it, then think out 5-10 years. You don't want to plant just for this year, but then determine, think of the architecture. Maybe there's design software now that is fairly cheap that you can do photorealistic designs. Take a picture from the perspective, like from the street, take a picture of the front of the house, and then you can upload it and use a computer-aided design software to superimpose plant material on there to have an idea of what it would look like, and then look into, okay, how much space do those plants need? Somebody mentioned that in determining your bed's scale, and that is a very important factor. If you're planting, if you want to plant something that gets 6 by 6 and something that's 4 by 4, you're at 12 feet right there, because you got to have some space behind that 6 by 6 against the house, and you need some space in between those two. Then if you go down and have an area for some perennials, you can very easily get a bed that's 16, 18 feet in depth. Now, you wouldn't want the entire bed to be that deep necessarily. You don't want straight lines, a soldier row. But you as you change that, what plant material you're using, that's where you can get different, change up the depth of the bed. But planning would be the most important thing. And then we take some paint, mark out our line. We mark it in dashes first. And then once we agree with the customer, that's the shape, then we paint it down. You can get a sod cutter and cut sod out if you want to, but a lot of times we'll just pull everything out with a non-selective herbicide and then come through and cut in an edge to the bed. We've got a tool that cuts in that edge, and then from there, we'll plant our material. We only use landscape fabric, weed barrier fabric, if a customer absolutely demands it. Once those, not if, when the weeds get a foothold in it, you can't do anything with them. I mean, they're almost impossible to pull without disrupting the area. So we try to stay away from using the fabrics unless we're putting in rock, in which case the fabric keeps the rock sinking down. The smaller the rock is, the more important that it is. Anybody ever use pea gravel as a mulch? And it seems like every few years you get 2 more scoops because it just disappears. It's just getting mashed down into the soil and mixed with. We've dug up beds before where we've got black, loamy soil with pea gravel in it, for this depth underneath a 2-inch layer of pea gravel. So that's kind of the process we use. Dry areas. When you say not getting enough water, you mean the plants are exhibiting dehydration? Is that what you mean? Or
So it's just where it is, it doesn't get enough rainfall in that area, like especially in the drought areas. If there's a lot of rain, obviously it's water, but it's just the nature of the grade of the
My
land.
roof overhang does that, so I've got a roof overhang. And it's probably this far all the way around, nothing will grow in that area.
right. Yeah, and that's where typically in those situations we wouldn't plant underneath that. And most of the time you've got larger shrubs back around the house, and they need to be further out anyway. You figure a typical 3x3, something that gets 3 foot wide, needs to be planted at least 4 foot from the edge of the house, if not 5 foot, to give enough space to walk behind the plants, to be able to work behind them, pruning, pulling weeds, that kind of stuff. So a lot of times, that would get them out from underneath where that roof edge
Yeah, I
is.
just realized that
So.
because I've only been there for 2 or 3 seasons, and I realized it. So now I just don't plant behind that line.
Yeah.
And I'll plant things in front of it because no water goes there ever.
Yeah. With the situation, if you have a bed and has it got a steep slope so water's not soaking in, or?
At the driveway in the house, because there's only, and the way the driveway is, there's a ton of rain, the driveway diverts the water.
Gotcha. Okay. So with that, there's several things you could put in: low volume irrigation, a drip irrigation that you can drip irrigation that's designed to work with an automated system and still work with a water hose. That's one thought. There are there's a product called Soil Moist. Right? How many of you are familiar with Soil Moist? Soil Moist has it's almost like the stuff that's in diapers, and it'll absorb moisture and it's supposed to put it back out in the soil. We use that for years. We've used that in difficult situations like that. There's another product called Tree Diaper that I'm looking at carrying in my store. We haven't got it nailed down. There's, you got to spend thousands of dollars for a minimum order, but it doubles as a mulch cover. It doesn't look like mulch, but it shades the soil, but it absorbs moisture and then puts it back out into the soil, and it shades the soil. It came out on the market about 5 years ago, and it's an alternative. How many of you have seen the Tree Gator irrigation bags or watering bags? It's an alternative to that. You don't have to, only in rare instances would you have to water. So it absorbs excess moisture, puts it back out in the soil. So I would think something along those lines would be the way to overcome that problem. So.
So you like that you put in these plants in their appropriate locations. But they're bitty ones. bed look gorgeous farm and wait for them to be.
I saw this in I was looking up in preparation for this. I was looking up, 2024 gardening trends and that sort of thing. And one of it was "Fake it till you make it" was the headline, and people using artificial plants and stuff. Now I have a funny story. I won't mention his name because he's pretty private, but I had a pretty prominent business owner that I took care of his lake house down in Spring City. And if you saw his house up in Crossville, it's like a $5 million house, and it's spectacular. I'm taking care of his lake house, and I planted some flowers, and he didn't like those flowers. About a few weeks later, and they're gone. I'm like, okay. Come out the next week, and there's a bunch of flowers there, and I'm kind of, if he knew what he wanted, all he had to do is tell me, and I went and looked at them. They were fake flowers, and for him, it was a big joke, because he runs with a lot of people that have money and that sort of thing, and they'd pull up in their boat and then come around his yard and see fake flowers in his bed, and it was just, yeah. So, but apparently that's the thing. Artificial turf is becoming more and more of a thing. I'm not a fan, just in general, of patience for it becoming pretty. In my opinion, probably not you want to hear, but you can always fill in with perennials until something pops up. But there's no way to get height without spending a lot of money. So you can. I'll ask people what their budget is for a landscape, and they always want to, hedge. And it's like, you tell me $50,000 for a 3,000 square foot space. I promise I can spend it. So tell me what you can work with, because that determines the plant sizes. A 1 gallon plant might be $10, and the same thing in a mature size might be 75. And so with patience, you can have a beautiful landscape with proper planting, regardless. So, was there another question?
Well, yeah, can you update us on the latest thinking on both sides? I've got probably 2 5 gallon bottles around that I'm afraid to use it now that they've admitted that it's causing cancer. So I've tried the vinegar and some salts, and that they agree. And is there anything that's safe? What do you use?
Don't drink it. Don't spray it on your body.
So
Here-
a mask and stay away from it.
We don't. No, we use it all the time. Here's the thing: is nobody reads, and this get me fired up. On the back of every pesticide, at the top, it says it is a violation of federal law to use this in a manner inconsistent with its labeling, and the label tells you what to wear. And every product tells you to wear gloves, long pants, socks, and shoes. In other words, don't get it on you. If you got leukemia from it, you sprayed it in a way inconsistent with its label, because the label says don't get it on you. In which case, that's my pet peeve. But I'm required by law. If the pesticide inspector comes by and I don't have gloves on, I can get fined, and I can have my charger pulled, and so on and so forth. But retail customers can go out and buy it and then sue the company that made it because they didn't use it the way the company told them to use it. And judges give them these huge settlements, which I feel is totally undone, because they put it on the label. It's been on there ever since the product came out. So my thing is, however, whatever your degree of comfort with it is, I mean, if I'm not belittling anybody in this. If you're really concerned about not getting a single drop on you, you can, buy a Type suit, and once every 2 weeks, put your full suit on and go out and spray. It doesn't stay in the landscape. It's absorbed through the green leaf tissue. Now here, the biggest problem, I think, in my opinion, hope I'm not going to get any defamatory lawsuit or anything. I think it's a bad idea to spray it on food. I don't think you're supposed to be ingesting the stuff. Why would you spray it on your wheat and your soybeans and everything else? I think Roundup Ready crops much more damage than spraying it in the landscape. If if glyphosate gets taken off the market, then weed control economically more expensive. Price on glyphosate, if you haven't noticed, it has nothing to, I won't say it has nothing. It has to do with inflation, then with all these lawsuits. Price of glyphosate products have doubled in the past years.
Yeah.
And so, but with the glyphosate, it was doubling before inflation hit because of all the settlements going on. And most people don't realize Roundup is a brand, but glyphosate is it's I mean, everybody makes a glyphosate product now. And so if you're using high yield, kills all, any of those brands that's a non-selective, look at the ingredient, probably the same thing. So there's no replacement for non-selective herbicides. Now, if you want to go the organic route, you're going to have a higher tolerance for weeds, and you're going to have a commitment to do a lot more work. It is possible, but it's a lot of work. So I'm not discouraging anybody from doing that. If you don't want to use herbicides, then that's the trade-off. And you just, that you're going to have, if you don't want to spray insecticides, then you're going to have some bugs, and, you just control the amount of damage to it.
Changing the subject, if you live on a wooded lot, how do you gracefully blend your yard with a woodland without having to road rocks?
Right. Great question. Great question. And we do have some things about that in here, but incorporating where you're transitioning from that woodland, kind of coming into the woodland garden effect, kind of transitioning into something else more formal, like up around the house. But working with the elements you have, and I would look for woodland garden landscaping plants and that sort of thing as a place to get started to see what's available. Right, ferns, hostas, azaleas, rhododendrons, those sort of things. So it'd be effective at making not this hard transition where there's the woods and here property, if that's what you're asking.
That is, those are all places deer love.
Yes. Our deer control regimen is liquid fence, and then 2 weeks later alternating with a product called Deer Scram.
What is it
So,
called again?
Liquid fence is basically rock mags, garlic, and if somebody sprayed that on your salad, you wouldn't either. But it's washed off by the rain, and then Deer Scram is cloves, ground up deer bones, dried deer blood, and I don't remember what else. But I don't think blood meal will.
Probably tracks,
It-
mice and rats.
Right. But the deer scram is made by the rain, and so we're doing those each once a month. But
Created by them?
right.
Interesting.
So by alternating those two products, the deer scram is a powder, and you just kind of take it around in the area, but they smell it, they stay away. The thing is, deer are creatures of habit, so you train them away, and then it's a lot easier to maintain that. They'll still come, it's kind of like when you go to a restaurant and you have a bad experience. If in the past you really liked it, you may try it again in the future. So deer are the same way. Geese are similar too. I haven't tried this. I've heard this, so don't take this as professional advice. I've heard grape Kool-Aid. If you spray, have you tried it? Does it work?
Right, I've read a lot about it.
Grape Kool-Aid?
Okay.
Highly recommend.
Yeah, the grape Kool-Aid tears their stomach up. No, not like kills them, like gives them a stomach ache. And so I've heard that you spray that on your lawn. And we use a product it's made by the same manufacturer as the Deer Scram. We use Goose Scram, and the Goose Scram you spray or you apply. It's a dry product. You apply it in a band, and it put this in before it dies.
There's a plug-in on the side of the car.
Great. There we go.
Will you be going over plants that are deer resistant?
I won't be, but the extension has some great publications on deer resistant plants. So That's always a challenge. So, we were talking about we use a product called Goose Scram. It basically works on the same thing. You know, it's an overpowering smell, but you got to treat the entire perimeter where they may be coming in from. I really want to try the grape Kool-Aid and see how that works. But did we skip over something there?
No?
We're talking about the edge. All right,
Okay.
then
Yeah, this is.
bed scale. This was what we talked about this a little bit. Here, you got the project on the side of the interstate or on the side of the highway. Most of the time, city workers are not landscape designers either. But depending on how big the area is, it would determine how big the bed should be. The biggest problem here is that see the plants planted out at the very edge of the bed. In 4 years, they're not going to be in the bed anymore. So, why is it that shopping centers do that? On the right there. Because what?
No maintenance.
Zoning made them put something in.
That's one thing, but
No maintenance.
no maintenance. You pay somebody to mulch once a year versus someone to come and mow 32 times a year, and all the liability with cars and so on and so forth. So a lot of times you'll see shopping centers that only have landscape beds and mulch everywhere. And it was one of those, when you go into a big fancy mall or a big upscale shopping center, it's very different. The reason is you don't realize how the psychology of how the landscape affects psychology and just prepares you to spend more money. You go into the mall and it's got the almost a tropical kind of look to it, the exotic kind of look, just puts you in a mindset, prepares you to open up your wallet. Target is,
Yeah.
they're not gearing towards someone to spend as much as they can, and they're on a budget, so that's what you kind of puts off that idea. Another big mistake is choosing only curves in the landscape. This is definitely a case of too many curves leading to chaos. Concrete guys also are not landscape designers. It's interesting when you go into a downtown area, and especially like public buildings, that sort of thing, the sidewalks are almost always straight lines. The reason is, when you're going out of the courthouse, you want to get in and out, right? But you can go to a restaurant 2 blocks away, and all of a sudden they've got these curves. Even if you can walk a straight line to the front door, they have curves to their sidewalks and that sort of thing. And it's just to put you in that more relaxed, spend money kind of mindset. But there's nothing wrong with using straight lines. The common water feature. Anybody here ever done one of these? The classic box store special. We're going to get the plastic tub. We're going to dig it out exactly the right depth. We put it in there, and then we just put a bunch of rocks around it. And there's our pond. Nothing wrong with that for starters, or a middle school water gardening project. But what are some ways you can fix that? Putting in some plants that spread and crawl to break up that edge where it doesn't just look like this. I've heard it referred to with the river stones, the pearl necklace around the pond. Another possibility is putting a bog on one side of it. Pitcher plants and Venus flytraps are indigenous to North Carolina, and will grow over here. So. The words are referring back to the previous picture. Sometimes somebody will have a totally flat lawn and they'll want to put in a water feature. There's an example of this down on the south side of Dayton. In their front yard, these people put in this 4 foot tall, 5 foot tall water feature in their front yard. And we're not talking, I mean, it's 40 foot from the road to the house, 50 foot. So not a big front yard. And it's just, it looks like a big old pile of rocks that has some water running down it. It just does not fit at all. And so if there's no natural change in the topography, if there's no grade to work with, then bring in soil. And by the way, if you're going to do that, use fill dirt first. You don't want to use topsoil for the whole thing. You only need, a layer of top. That's all we have in Tennessee anyway. So just a layer of topsoil. Or you could go with a pondless water feature. I think this is a pretty neat example. When I first was up here, when me and my wife started dating and we came up here to meet her parents and visit them, my first introduction was driving up 58. I lived over in Decatur and getting off on, I don't remember for sure what road it was, but we drive by and somebody's got 2 toilets in the front hill. And I was like, what? And Jennifer was like, that's yard decorations. I was like, I get it now. I've been here long enough to understand. That's funny. So with the pondless, this really isn't necessarily a pondless water feature because that does have a bit of a pond there. But the idea is you have some focal point, water flowing over it. The coolest one I've seen lately, here's a trend, fire and water. That they have I saw it at the Green Industry Expo. They had these boulders that were set up as a water feature, and the top one had a propane burner right underneath the surface of the water. Couldn't see it, but the flames, it would ignite and it would burn. The flame is dancing on top of the water. That was really cool. And since then, I've seen some in more like a patio fireplace kind of thing. So I don't know exactly what the price tag is on these, but they're pretty cool. But pondless water feature has a reservoir underneath and pumps up through, recycles it, and it with water. Anybody here have a water feature? A pond, right? Mosquito control is a constant issue with that. There are a lot of upkeep. Pondless basically takes the upkeep side of it out, but you can have running water and.
So I have a trough. Is filled mostly with black river rock, and the water is relatively shallow, just covers that. And I'm getting a scum that builds up on the rocks. Any suggestions for what I can treat the water with?
Shooting from the hip, it sounds like you would need an acid. Ponds and Plant down south of Dayton, David Mansard, that's his specialty. He would be able to tell you for sure.
Was it the one place
I'm sorry.
to go there and visit what's done?
Oh yeah. The first year I got back, I mowed for a fella in Dayton, and then that winter he laid me off and I went to work for David, and that was back. He was still in the building that is down below. He was just getting started with stuff up top, and to see what all he's done in the past 18 years is pretty amazing. Lighting is a lot of times not thought of, but the landscape is only, put all this money into it, designing and having a beautiful garden space and that sort of thing. And then, it's only evident during daylight hours. Lighting can add a whole new dimension and can really make the landscape look, just tremendously different. But you want to make sure that you do it in the right way. You have to do Oak Ridge Halloween. A lot of times less is more when it comes to lighting. I saw this one fella, he planted like 20 different trees, and they were about 4 foot tall in his front yard, and he had lighting on every single one of them. This is in a lake community, and I'm like, boy, I would not want to be his neighbor. But safety is a major concern, and lighting helps with that. It can also help people, somebody's coming, think in the wintertime, it's getting dark at 5:30. You're having guests over at 6 o'clock. If you have a little bit of pathway lighting, there's all kinds of different light, not just what's available on the shelf in Lowe's. Vista lighting, VISTA, and FX Luminaire are two very prominent brands.
What's
That-
special about them?
They just have, you can see the variety
Is it
that's
solar-
available in all.
predominantly solar?
Solar lighting is just starting to become a thing, and with solar, there's not the programmability that there is with low voltage lighting. Talk about a trend. Color changing, zonable, dimmable LED lighting is becoming more and more of a thing. We've done 2 systems with that, and so we did this project about 4 or 5 years ago, significant amount of hardscaping, and we put ledge lighting underneath the caps on the walls. And so it just kind of cascades light, every 10 foot around the hardscape. And then, they can program it with, the team colors for game weekend. It's Valentine's Day this week. They can program it white and red, or and then it can fade in and out in between colors, so on and so forth. So there's a lot of stuff you can do with that. The technology is exponentially there, but the solar, it'll catch up eventually, getting the technology in between Bluetooth and that sort of thing, and Wi-Fi. Eventually, you won't have to run all the wiring. But the problem with solar is a lot of times when you're lighting something, it's aid in the environment, and so it gets tricky with that. But for some basic safety lighting, if you've got a wide open area, solar lights are adequate for pathway lighting. Up lighting really will pull out, especially in the winter, pull out the architecture of a tree. You don't realize how beautiful a tree is a lot of times just when you're passing around, but when it snows, how many of you noticed in this snow we had a couple of weeks ago, you looked at a tree and said, wow, I didn't realize how beautiful that thing is, just the form of it. So lighting can kind of do that same kind of thing. Low voltage lighting it's not fixed wiring. So you can pick up and move fixtures, a lot of flexibility with it. Basically, you want to feature the things that you want to attract attention. You're not trying to light up the entire landscape. A limited plant palette, another common problem in the landscape, and that is, the front hill, we don't know what to do with it. Throw some blue rug juniper on it. Throw a lot of blue rug juniper on it. And what happens is, it used to be, it wasn't gray owl, but there was a juniper, low growing juniper, spreads about 6. I can't remember the name of the variety off the top of my head. I know I've pulled a ton of them out. The mites get on them, and they just go from plant to plant to plant. And if you don't get the mites under control, in a season, they can wipe out a significant, when you have a monoculture, all of just one plant. And so breaking it up with different types of plants can definitely be beneficial. It breaks up that monotony, and it doesn't have to be super expensive. You think, what are some other plants that would accomplish the same thing as the blue Pacific juniper or the blue rug juniper? If you're brave, Vinca minor, periwinkle, or Vinca major. Now the problem is how aggressive you want them to be, and that sort of thing. But you could also, in this environment, there's some sun-loving hostas you could throw. It would be low growing. You could throw some perennial flowers out there, and then mix it up and do some bulbs in the same areas where the perennials are. You have some spring flowers. You have some summer perennials in this area. So me personally, this was put in this presentation, I think, as an example of what not to do, but personally, I like It's pretty good.
It was good.
It's mostly hostas through there, but there are, they put that focal point of a planter in the middle, and that was one of the trends. Was see, they come back to me as I'm going along. Planting for texture and foliage is one of the, again, what has been is that which shall be. That's coming back around, and so looking for plants that maybe have a unique color to their foliage or a unique shape to their foliage, and using those instead of thinking about flowering qualities of a plant. You want everything to work together, but you don't want to have my landscape would be, oh, look at that, oh, look at that, oh, look at that, oh, look at that, a little ADHD or something. But you want to try to avoid that somewhat. This example here, this has to be like an arboretum or trial garden or something. Design perspective, that looks awful. All right. Now, if you're wanting to see, an example of how these plants grow, or you're testing it or something like that, it can make sense. But from a design perspective, there's no unity to it. Now, how could you produce some unity using the same material? Break them up into smaller groups, and then use them in kind of a geometrical pattern and repeating patterns. And the coolest project I've worked on to date was about 12 years ago. And it was a builder, and he bought this real unique property. And long story short, he brings me in there. He says, I want a vineyard over here. I want a water feature here. I want these big limestone rocks. I want you to make a couple of benches with these out here on the lake. All the rest of this limestone, I want you to finish this retaining wall and build a retaining wall over here. I don't care what you do with the rest of it. There'll be 18-wheeler load of plant here on Monday. Get whatever else you need. Cost plus 20%. Cool. We started the week after Thanksgiving. We finished up the first week of April. And it was just a really cool project. But with that, the challenge was, okay, we've got all this material that he bought at a super discounted rate coming in on this 18-wheeler. And it's not going to be enough to do this whole thing. I don't know what he ordered. I don't know what I want to do, so on and so forth. And so what we did was we took that truckload of plants and we planted throughout this. It's about a 4-acre property. We planted throughout it. And then we came back and we filled in between. And so it all feels like it works together. But it was a little overwhelming at the beginning. But that was a really neat project. Poor rock placement. The great rock drop. You know who loves the great rock drop? Site developers. What they did was they just saved a lot of money not having to haul those rocks off. And this is obviously a shopping center of some kind or a parking area. And so they just drop them on the ground. Now there's nothing wrong with using material from the job site in the job site, but they just plop them on top of the ground and it looks just doesn't fit, doesn't look like it's supposed to be there. And so that's much better. Generally the same type of limestone rocks. Now, of course, it had time for some vegetation growing around it. The key with rocks, hiding the edges. That's the whole key. You can make a rock, a 2-man boulder. You can make it seem like it's about 1,000-pound rock just by how you put it in the ground. You want that tip of the iceberg effect. Dig it down a little bit, cover the edges. This was probably a really, really big rock. Choices were get an excavator with a hammer on it out here at $250 an hour or something. I don't know what they charge, or we can just work with it. And the decision was made, just work with it. And They made it work. It looks like this might be around a pool, and I promise you, kids love that. Right? I don't mind. Only using plants, common mistake. And if you liken your landscape to baking a cake, plants actually end up being the icing on the cake. You want to think about the more substantial things, structures, what's common areas, what's utility areas, what are things you want people to see, what are things you want to be screened, and all those sort of things, planning around it. And then I had one project we worked on years ago where they wanted a sidewalk, and their dogs had a pathway that they wanted to try to redirect the dogs. But they always said, I said, wherever they walk is where they're going to walk. It doesn't matter what you do. You can plant a plant, whatever. They'll dig it up because that's where they like to walk. So working with those features and think about traffic flows and those sort of things. Your plant material is actually the easiest change about it. The irrigation system, when it's in the ground, it's expensive to change it. In a patio, and then you want to move it somewhere else, that sort of thing. Plant material, a few $100s, you dig something up and actually for free, get up from one place and plant it somewhere else if you do it at the right time and do it carefully, or dig something up, place something else there. Is relatively inexpensive compared to other things. So you want to put those elements in. When we're constructing a landscape, generally hardscaping and irrigation kind of go in hand. And then after that, creating our beds, planting our plant material, mulching, and then doing sod at the end, or seed and straw if we're doing lawn from seed. Anybody know a house like this? My neighbor, when we moved it back into Spring City, into town, our neighbor beside us had this huge, I think, fir tree that, I mean, from the road, it literally hid half of his house. And when we moved in, he was an older man. He said, we got in a conversation because we were fixing up this house we had bought. He said, I'm not worried about my house anymore. I'm just going to let it fall down. I'll die before it finishes falling down. And he was right. He did pass away, but that tree was a Christmas tree when his kids were small. And that thing just totally engulfed the house. So remember, your landscape can grow and change. And so be flexible. And I was rushed a little bit through it, but hope they just amazing. And I think I'm out of time.
Really informative, a lot of good discussion, and we are most appreciative of your time. We have a little something we'd like to give you. All right. And for everyone else, we're going to be doing a raffle here in just a moment. Do we have the other pieces?
So I'll hang out if anybody has any questions you want to discuss after.
And we also have evaluation forms. If you haven't already done one, we always like to know what you like to see different, other ideas for topics. So we would like to see some input on that if you can. And what was the next? The next one is butterfly. There was one more about vegetables. you.